I'd like to introduce our speaker, Dr. Maddie Lewis. Maddie is a petrologist and field geologist who uses geochemistry and geochronology to understand crustal chemical evolution over time. In her research, she uses geochemistry of magmas and minerals and thermodynamic models to track internal and external processes that affect magnet systems. She completed her PhD at Caltech in 2021, a postdoc at Purdue in 2023, and is currently assistant professor at the University of Wyoming. So welcome, Maddie.
All right, thanks, Mike. So I saw on the circling slideshow before I pulled up my slides that they had my old title, which was Caldera-forming eruptions, volcanic eruptions. Is this on? No, there we go. Caldera-forming volcanic eruptions in Nevada and their magma storage regions. But I was told to make it flashier, and so I picked a title with the word Yellowstone in it. I figured that it's a little local to Teton County. Maybe, okay, next county over. But that means that I have to tell you guys what I mean by Yellowstone style. So I'll do that in a second. I do first want to acknowledge if my thing will go forward. Nope, I'll just use the buttons. Maybe. It worked a second ago. Buttons are good. Okay. I want to acknowledge a number of my collaborators. First, Rachel Bryan is a current master's student working under me at the University of Wyoming. You will see some of her data. Mike Eddy was my postdoc supervisor at Purdue. That's where the bulk of this project really started. And then we have a couple of other collaborators, Joel DeZormo at the University of Nevada, Reno, that's like an hour and a half from the field site in this photo. And then Isla Pamukchu and Anna Rufer at Stanford, all of whom have been invaluable in getting this research together. Okay. So, next up, what do I mean by Yellowstone-style eruptions? Okay. These are large eruptions. I say greater than 100 cubic kilometers of magma erupted. In Yellowstone, those eruptions have been even larger scale. In this talk, I'm talking about eruptions with a range of scales. So we'll see what those are. And I mean caldera-forming eruptions. Okay, there we go. And now what is a caldera? So instead of putting up pictures of Yellowstone, which you guys have probably already seen, I picked pictures of other National Park Service managed calderas. There are several. One is Crater Lake. One is Katmai, and Kilauea is another. So these are very different scale features. None of these are within that. Whoop, I have a pointer. None of these three are within this greater than 100 cubic kilometer scales, but they all are calderas. They're all filled with some kind of liquid, whether it is water or lava sometimes. Now, how do these sorts of things form? Because when the majority of people think about a volcano, they think about a mountain, and we are talking about a big hole in the ground instead. So caldera-forming eruptions are those that were so large or magma was stored so close to the surface that rather than building up a mountain, they essentially emptied out the magma storage region beneath that volcano, causing this sort of piston block to fall down into the magma storage region. I have then been using this other word, or this other series of words, magma storage region. What does that mean? So I'm sure you guys have probably heard the terms like magma chamber, or yeah, magma chamber is what the general public tends to use. As someone who studies magmas, I think about magmas being stored in a slightly more complicated way. What you guys probably think of as a magma chamber is this like liquid blob of molten rock pretty close underneath a volcano. I think of this entire region, which is partially molten throughout. There are all these little lenses in here that are drawn as melt plus crystals. There are also way too many arrows on this diagram because I pulled it from another paper, so please ignore all the arrows. This whole magma storage region is all of this. It is all of this hot rock with some molten rock in it. It's not just the purely liquid part at the top. And to make sure that we're all on the same page with definitions, magma is not only a liquid. Magma is a mixture of liquid, which I refer to as the melt, and crystals, which are the solid part. This is an extremely simplified diagram of that, where the pink is melt, that's the liquid, and all of these, there's two different types of crystals in this hypothetical magma. There's white rectangles and black hexagons. Those are solids. So this is what a magma looks like in my mind. Okay. Within these magma storage regions, there are portions with different amounts of melt and different amounts of crystals in them. Okay. This yellow area, that's mostly melt. It's almost entirely liquid. It's also labeled here as XP, meaning crystal pore. This is usually towards the top of the magma storage region, and that is usually what is tapped during an eruption. Surrounding that, and as you go into cooler parts of the magma system, you get what we call a mush. That is a mixture of crystals and liquid, but it is still fluid enough that it can move around, that it can flow. In even colder, or still hot, but less hot regions, you get more crystals, and you get what's called the rigid sponge, or this crystal lockup phenomenon, where there are too many crystals for that magma to flow anymore. So these crystals are bumping into each other. There's still melt in between them, and so we still call it a magma. But it is rigid. It is acting as a solid for most of its lifetime. And then surrounding this, there's going to be some fully solidified rock. Here it's labeled as granodiorite. It could be any solidified rock. These ones? Sorry, what was on last page? Anyway, these are later injected melts, similar to the previous page, or this one with all of the arrows. I pulled this from another paper, so it has a few extra things on it. But yeah, these black ones are, if we were looking at this entire magma system through time, these black injections are very similar to these sort of molten lenses here. More melty bits that keep getting shoved into there. Yeah, because magma, that's a good question. Thanks for bringing it up. Because what I'm really going to talk about here is that magma systems are going to evolve over time. They're not a static, like we have a blob of melt sitting here forever. You're going to keep adding things or removing crystals as they solidify. So thank you for your question. Okay, and that's a good segue into temperature versus time in a magma system. So I really want to focus on what is an eruptible magma and when during the lifetime of a volcano and magmatic system is there magma that could erupt, okay? So there are 4 different main color regions on here. We have temperature qualitatively on the y-axis and time increasing off to the right. This red dashed line, this temperature liquidus, above that temperature, all of the magma is liquid. There are no crystals in it. Okay. This blue dashed line, temperature solidus, below that dashed line, there is no more magma. It is all solid, no melt. It's not, we don't even call it a magma anymore. Okay. In this pink and purple regions, those are the ones where we have magma, we have melt, and we have crystals. In the purple area, this rigid sponge, that is that crystal lockup region where there is melt, but there are too many crystals for that melt to flow. So that is not an eruptible magma. This pink area is eruptible. There is enough melt present that the crystals can kind of move around and the melt can start to push them out. So anything above this temperature eruptible, the purple dashed line, is eruptible magma. Okay, you can erupt something with no crystals in it. You can erupt something with some crystals in it, but you can't erupt something that's like 50% crystals. They will bump into each other and they cannot flow. So this is showing how over time temperature could evolve throughout some magmatic system. Perhaps we'll start over here. These peaks would represent eruptions. So these peaks are all within the eruptible zone, but following an eruption, it is hypothesized at least that the temperature in a magma system is going to drop off. You've removed a bunch of melt from that magma storage region. All of the, or some portion of the eruptible melt has been removed. And so what's left over may be solid rock. It may be in this rigid sponge state. So here and here. But we don't entirely know that, right? This is a difficult thing to test because it's very hard to get to a magma chamber or magma storage region underneath an active volcano where you've seen when eruptions happen, okay? So that's what I'm going to be looking at going forward, is how can we see what's going on under a volcano? Okay. I also have a whole list of things that affect the eruptibility of a magma. The previous slide was just focusing on temperature, okay? If it's hot enough, there are few enough crystals, they melt, there's enough liquid, it can erupt. And thus, crystallinity also has a major control on whether something is eruptible. The bulk composition, specifically silica or SiO2 content of that magma, affects the magma viscosity, which affects how well it can flow and thus affects eruptibility. Pressure has a somewhat small effect, but pressure has a huge effect on whether there are bubbles coming out of the magma. When I say volatile content, that's like volcanic gases. Those volcanic gases came from somewhere. They were once dissolved in the melt in the magma. So when they are coming out as bubbles, those affect the melting temperature, they affect whether the magma is crystallizing, and they affect the viscosity of the magma by just being another phase to get in the way of flow. So I have all of these somewhat crazy person arrows showing that yes, bulk composition and temperature are related. Magmas with lower silica have lower melting temperature. Sorry, other way around. Magmas with higher silica have lower melting temperatures. So these two are connected. The temperature or the pressure that something crystallizes at affects how high silica it can get to. Pressure and volatile content are very strongly correlated. If you drop pressure, you're going to exsolve volcanic gases and create bubbles. That's going to mess with what's eruptible and what's not. But if you release all of those gases, you're going to drop the pressure within the magma chamber because those bubbles have escaped. So at the risk of looking like a crazy person putting up a web of red string on the wall, I'm just going to gray out the things that I'm not going to talk about today. So I am going to look at bulk composition of magmas. I'm going to look at their temperature paths, how that affects crystallinity and volatile content. Okay, so we already saw what a caldera is. So how might an eruption actually affect the eruptibility of melt that has stayed in the magma chamber following an initial eruption? Okay, if magma is ascending, you're going to drop pressure. It's going to cause degassing, which causes crystallization. That would suggest that magma remaining down here is going to solidify. Okay, we would think. Along a similar pathway, if magma is erupting, it is probably cooling, which is going to cause crystallization and degassing. And this crystallization and degassing actually becomes a feedback loop, where if you're crystallizing things, there's less melt for gases to be dissolved in, so they come out. You create volcanic gases. everything likes to crystallize. However, we don't quite know how much crystallizes. Does all of it crystallize, or is there still some eruptible melt left after an initial eruption? Okay. So here are the two hypotheses that I am looking at, where I'm studying two different eruptions. We have our first one. We know that both of them erupted, so these peaks are eruption 1 and eruption 2. The hypothesis on the left, by the way, this is relative temperature and relative time, similar to a couple slides ago. I also added on here crystallinity. Okay, that's going to move in the opposite direction of temperature. The colder you are, the more crystalline the rock is, or the magma is. The hotter it is, the more liquid it is. Okay, so hypothesis 1 on the left here suggests that after an initial eruption, the magma system moves into an uneruptible state. It's in the rigid sponge region between where everything is solid and this lockup threshold, which would mean you need some reheating event to cause eruption number 2. Hypothesis on the right here says that following eruption number 1, you do cool off, you do increase your crystallinity some, but you don't fall so far down that that magma is no longer eruptible. Okay, so those are the two hypotheses that I'm running with. And then I have my Coke bottle analogy. This is, which one? This is the left hypothesis, where yes, you have a slightly bubbly Coke bottle. You could put the cap on this and it would stay on, and it would probably just kind of stop fizzling and not try to go off again, unless you went and heated it up or shook it, right? Which would be this jump. Okay. Hypothesis 2, if you put Mentos in Diet Coke and tried to put the cap on it, the cap might stay on there for a little while, which in geology terms could be some tens of thousands of years. But it's going to blow the cap off again without you having to mess with it. That would be eruption number 2, where the magma stayed eruptible inside the Coke bottle. Okay. Okay. All right. So we do have some evidence that following large caldera-forming eruptions, there are subsequent eruptions from that same caldera. One example is up the road. In Yellowstone, we have these couple of what are called resurgent domes. These are post-caldera eruptions thought to be from the same magma system. Okay, they're far less explosive, as in they're not explosive. They don't form new calderas, but they are magma that is still mobile after the large caldera-forming eruption. Another National Park Service managed caldera is Valles caldera, and you can see these resurgent domes in this elevation map. These high red points are different post-caldera or small eruptions. The large caldera is this big old circle here. So, more National Park managed calderas. So, there was a change in eruption style between big old caldera-forming eruptions and their subsequent resurgent domes. Okay, the domes are not explosive and they're pretty small. So my question is, why? Is there less magma? Is it cooler magma? Or, okay, does the magma in storage have lower dissolved volatile content? Volatiles exsolving and forming bubbles from a rising magma tend to drive even larger eruptions, even more explosive eruptions. Or are there more pathways for degassing? Can this gas just get out of the magma without causing explosions? Okay. The problem is with young calderas like Yellowstone and Valles, and yes, I refer to these as young, even though they are hundreds of thousands to millions of years old, because they're still active. It's hard to access the magma storage system. You can't dig down to magma and study it unless you're extremely lucky and live in Hawaii and can just scoop it up. But in any case, those are small. These are really large eruptions. We can't get to them. So my solution here is to go and look at much older eruptions. These are between 36 and 18 million years old, so significantly older, still relatively young geologically. But these are all part of the mid-tertiary ignimbrite flare-up, which is all of these red circle oval blobs out in Nevada. There was something like 30 to 40 documented caldera-forming eruptions between 36 and 18 million years ago. And what's great about these is that they are partially eroded down so that we can actually see what was going on underneath them, which we cannot see in the active ones, or at least we can't touch it. Okay. I'm focusing on the Stillwater caldera complex here in central western Nevada. For a sense of scale, I'm going to bring up Yellowstone again. This is a figure from the USGS where they're showing the scale of various different eruptions. One you guys might be familiar with is Mount St. Helens. That's about 1/4 of a cubic kilometer. So it's itty bitty compared to the Yellowstone eruptions. The smallest Yellowstone eruption is the Mesa Falls tuff, and it is almost 300 cubic kilometers. And then we have our two very large guys up here, these much larger circles, the Lava Creek and Huckleberry Ridge tuffs. The two that I am studying are on a similar scale. The tuff of Poco Canyon is on a similar scale to the Mesa Falls tuff, and it's 25.3 million years old. And the tuff of 11 Mile Canyon is roughly 2,500 cubic kilometers of erupted material, and it is 25.1 million years old. So ever so slightly younger than the tuff of Poco Canyon. These volumes are more approximate than something like Yellowstone or Mount St. Helens, just because they are far more eroded, but we think they're on similar scales. So where are we? This is just a Google Earth image of part of Nevada. This is the Stillwater Range. This is Pyramid Lake. And this is the outline of where the Poco Canyon caldera and the 11 Mile calderas sit today. 11 Mile overlaps multiple mountain ranges. Poco is only exposed in one. But what's excellent about this area is that there's all of this vertical relief in these mountains. Okay, the mountains are all of these dark things, and there's all of these valleys in between. We get those tectonically. So a very simplified cross section to show you what's going on here. If we started out with, let's just say, 2 volcanic layers, okay, 2 large eruptions. Orange one is younger, gray one's on the bottom, so it's slightly older. And underneath that is plutonic rocks, so that's solidified magma, but it's some amount older than the eruptions. Out in this region, there's been a lot of tectonic extension. These are normal faults. That's the same type of fault as the Teton fault. So during tectonic extension, the crust is stretched. These normal faults propagate through the volcanic and plutonic layers. And if those continue to be extended, those blocks of crust essentially fall over like dominoes and rotate. So what we actually see in mountain ranges is a tilted section of what originally erupted. Down in the valleys, we bury some of the plutonic section. But we can actually see eruptions that came out of this magmatic system that was this plutonic body. So we can see the part of the intrusive magma system and the volcanics that came out of it, which you cannot do in active volcanic systems most of the time. Okay. This is the fun field photos part, where you can see the normal fault here, it's really honestly awesome. As someone who really doesn't study faults, this is the coolest one I've ever seen. This is the fault scarp. This is from an earthquake in the 1950s. This is me for scale, and that's our truck in the distance. So this normal fault, which uplifts the mountain and drops the valley down, it has quite a bit of offset on it, and it is variable along the length of the fault. This is Rachel, my master student, standing next to it. She's a similar height to me, so that's a pretty large fault scarp to be able to just stand next to it and have it be twice the size of a human from one earthquake. So bit of a tangent, but this is the Dixie Valley Fault. The Dixie Valley Fault is why we have the awesome exposure of volcanics and plutonics of the same age. So that's why it is in here. Okay. This type of exposure is pretty unique. This is me again. I think this is the photo I sent to advertise the talk. And I am standing in the eruption conduit of this 300 cubic kilometer eruption, which you also cannot do pretty much anywhere else because you would explode. Or it gets covered by its own eruption and you can't get to it. So this dashed line is outlining the eruption conduit. Outside of that is the volcanic pile that was intruded by the feeder to this giant eruption. I'm also making more comparisons to Yellowstone. Hopefully that's flashy enough. This is someone else holding a piece of the Huckleberry Ridge tuff from Yellowstone, and it looks quite similar to the tuff of 11 Mile Canyon from the Stillwater Range, which is one of the ones that I am studying. So yes, colors are slightly different, but overall, same type of rock. Those are, if I zoomed in on a higher quality photo, I could tell that this surrounding is this type of rock, this tuff. And in here, actually, whoever keeps asking these questions is doing great because I brought examples. I can pass these around. Should I do that now or after? What do you think?
You could do it now.
Okay. This flatter one is a piece of the tuff. This is a really welded or really hard part of it so that it doesn't fall apart when I pass it around to you guys. And this is a part of the conduit, this smaller one. The tuff has a bunch of these little pumice chunks in it. So that's how we know that it erupted. It has pieces of things that we know only form on the surface. And this conduit piece, or it's a dike piece that I will talk about in a couple of slides. It doesn't have any of those pieces. It has larger crystals and it has slightly fewer of them. So you can tell by looking really closely in the field. It's hard to tell on the photo. That's why I outlined it. Okay. Now, geologic map of the Stillwater Caldera complex. I want you guys to focus on the Poco Canyon caldera, which I guess the people on Zoom can't see where I'm pointing. I apologize, Zoom people. It's in the upper left. Poco Canyon caldera is this one. It has a series of volcanic units in blue. So that's the tuff that I'm passing around, the flatter one. And it has a pluton that formed at the same time. So that's a piece of the intrusive magma system. That's the Freeman Creek pluton. I didn't bring a piece of that. The other piece that is going around is from this caldera margin dike right here. In a couple slides, I have a better map of that, so we'll just wait on that one. The 11 Mile Canyon caldera is this much larger dashed area. And the tuff of 11 Mile Canyon, which erupted out of that caldera, is all of this green stuff. So very large area. Okay, I'm telling you that this pluton is related to both of these eruptions. We're only looking at part of a pluton here. The majority of it is buried underneath Dixie Valley here or underneath these other mountain ranges. So we can only work with what's exposed, but at least we have some of it. And I am telling you that they are related because of mineral chemistry and age. I have some age dates later on. But these plots are showing trace elements in the mineral zircon. So they're showing that the chemistry of minerals in the pluton, which is red here, these red triangles, the chemistry of the minerals in the pluton matches the chemistry of minerals in the erupted tuffs, volcanic units. There is a little bit of a mismatch. I can talk about that. This is from a previous paper before I started working on this. And in the very last slide, I have some brand new data from last week that shows that there is an even better match. So, okay. This is our way of showing that, yes, this intrusive magmatic unit is essentially from the same magma system as the volcanics. Those volcanics were removed from that magma system. Okay, so we're back to the geologic map. I'm going to just zoom in on the Poco Canyon caldera area here. Hooray! I apologize, the colors have changed. This is now a map that I made rather than a map that someone else made. All right, so what do we have here? We have Dixie Valley on this side. The Dixie Valley Fault, where I showed you those really cool field photos, is on the east side of the range here. So the paleo up direction, as in what was the land surface at the time that these eruptions happened, that land surface is now dipping down almost 80 degrees down into the earth on the west side of the range. So paleo up is that way. And this mountain range is essentially showing us a cross-section of the crust, which is really cool. I should mention, so that it's not confusing, there is an even older caldera just to the north. That's the Job Canyon caldera. That's what this one is. We think that that one is a separate magma chamber. It has its own separate pluton down there. Poco Canyon caldera is this one. Okay, and I'm focusing on this orange, which is the tuff of Poco Canyon. This purple, which is the flat piece of rock that's going around. I'm focusing on this caldera margin dike, which is purple, which is the smaller piece of rock that's going around, and the Freeman Creek Pluton, which is this light pink down here. Okay. Yes. The volcanics in this tilted section are off to the west. Intrusive units are off to the east. And bless you. This dashed line represents the caldera floor. That's the base of that piston block that fell down into the magma system. So it is also the base of the tuff that is deposited during those eruptions. Okay, now I'm going to zoom in here, and I'm also going to rotate it 90 degrees so that this paleo up direction is just up on the screen. So we don't have to mentally rotate that anymore. Okay, so we've zoomed in. Paleo up is now up, which means north is to your right. Okay. I should just click forward. The things that I am studying are the tuff of Poco Canyon. This looks very similar to what you guys are looking at. It is variably welded, meaning some of the pieces, like the one that I passed around, are really hard and they break into annoyingly sharp pieces that pop your tires. And that's at the base of the section down here. Towards the upper parts of that eruption, we get this much less densely welded, much more crumbly tuff. You see this in Yellowstone as well, where the welded parts form these like columns, like at Tower Fall and things. And the upper parts kind of erode away a lot more easily. This is like Pumice Fall and things like that. Okay, so this is the tuff of Poco Canyon. Whoop. Okay, this is the granite porphyry caldera margin dike. That's the other little piece that I passed around. It looks very much like this. Okay. Boop. Okay. It looks slightly different towards the middle of the dike versus towards the very bottom. In the middle, this is much closer to what I passed around. It has this porphyritic texture, meaning it has a very fine-grained grayish matrix, but it has these big crystals in it. Towards the very deepest parts, it is much coarser grained, and there are a lot more crystals in it. Okay. So it's much closer in texture. Whoop, sorry, one more piece. Up towards the very end of the dike, this tip, it is much finer grained, and there are fewer crystals in it. And this starts looking very, very similar to the tuff of Poco Canyon. So even texturally, this is telling us that the tuff of Poco Canyon erupted out of this thing, this intrusive dike system. Okay. Along the side of this granite porphyry dike, we have this very pink potassium feldspar, so I've abbreviated KSP. It's a granite. It only goes part way up, and it is intruded by the granite porphyry dike. We know that because there are blocks of the K-spar granite within the granite porphyry, as in this porphyry intruded and pulled pieces off of the wall and incorporated them into itself. And all the way at the bottom is the Freeman Creek Pluton down here. We know that the Freeman Creek Pluton intrudes the granite porphyry because, similar to the logic in the last slide, there are blocks of the granite porphyry, this purple guy. Okay. Thank you, library. Okay, there are blocks of the granite porphyry incorporated into the granite Freeman Creek Pluton. So these field relationships, why is it beeping? Okay, these field relationships allow us to construct a relative timeline or the sequence of events that occurred during this caldera-forming eruption. Remember, in something modern, all we would really see is the tuff. We might see some later eruptions if there are any, but in this case, we just have this really cool cross section where we can actually go and look at the rocks and see what was going on immediately before and after the eruption. Okay. I'm insisting that the Freeman Creek Pluton, this granite, is the youngest. That's because it intrudes into everything else, meaning as in these parts of the dikes, meaning everything else had to exist for this granite to intrude into them. Cool. All right. The next youngest is the granite porphyry dike. This is what we think feeds the eruption. Okay. So, or at least this conduit fed the eruption. So we know that this Pluton is younger than this granite porphyry. We know that the tuff came out of this conduit, but the material that erupted had to come out before this dike got filled, or else there wouldn't be an open conduit for the erupted material to come out. So there we go. There are also blocks of the tuff of Poco Canyon in the granite porphyry. So both of those pieces of evidence tell us that, there we go, more pieces, that the tuff of Poco Canyon is ever so slightly older than what now fills the granite porphyry dike. Okay, the dike intrudes into the tuff. The tuff had to be there to be intruded. Go forward. Okay. All right. The granite porphyry right here on the left and the potassium feldspar granite on the right here are in direct contact, and we know that there are blocks of the K-spar granite in the porphyry. So the K-spar granite has to be older than the porphyry. Because of the eruptive relationships, we think that the granite porphyry and the tuff of Poco Canyon are very close in age. And so we've assigned the potassium feldspar granite as the oldest thing. Okay. All right. So that gives us a relative chronology. If we want to learn how long all of this takes, as in if we were looking at some active volcanic system, we might be able to figure out how old an eruption is, but we don't know how long things continue to be magmatically active underneath that volcano. Okay. So to quantify that, I used this extremely long name, which I will read out: uranium, lead, zircon, chemical abrasion, isotope dilution, thermal ionization, mass spectrometry, geochronology. Okay. What that essentially means is we use isotopes of uranium, which radioactively decays at a known rate, to isotopes of lead to date or to figure out how old a rock is, or how long ago that rock crystallized. Zircon is this extremely helpful little mineral that incorporates uranium, but not lead. So there's no starting lead in there to mess with our measurements. This is through a microscope. These are really tiny. The process of doing this is we first have to extract zircon from the rock. That has many steps in it, but you can see all these cute little zircons here. They're these clear ones with these nice little crystal shapes. We then do what's called chemical abrasion, which is we partially dissolve the crystal to remove any zones that have been damaged by this radioactive decay, because those will mess with our isotopes too. And then we dissolve each little grain individually in little cups like these and put them through a whole series of chemistry steps to separate out just the uranium and lead atoms. We then put that uranium and lead into this thermal ionization mass spectrometer, which essentially heats samples up until those atoms ionize, and then they go into a mass spectrometer. A mass spectrometer's job is to count atoms, and it counts atoms at particular masses. And so we can count how many atoms of uranium-235 and uranium-238, these are just example isotopes, can count how many atoms of each isotope were in this sample, which allows us to calculate a crystallization age, meaning when did some individual zircon grain that had dissolved crystallize. Okay, that tells us how old the rock is. This is an example of what that resulting data looks like. And this is from the 11-mile system, because it's 25.2. Okay. Okay. This is a whole bunch of that uranium lead zircon geochronology data. On the left side, we have age in millions of years. The particular isotopes that I used to calculate the age aren't of particular importance here. But older is up, younger is down. Okay. The x-axis is relative. I've just put these in order of what we know is the magmatic sequence that I presented a couple slides ago, where the youngest thing was the Freeman Creek pluton, which intruded into everything else. Next youngest was the granite porphyry, then the tuff, and then that very pink potassium feldspar granite. Okay, so these are in order from older to younger. What we learn here is that all of these events occurred at about 25.3 million years. One step back, sorry. Each one of these vertical bars is an individual zircon crystal. Okay, so they have a vertical distance based on analytical uncertainties, but the majority of those uncertainties overlap. In some of these more explosive, chaotic, intrusive portions, there are some of these older zircon grains that we think are essentially like ripped off of the wall of things that were already crystallized. So our youngest grains pretty much all overlap at 25.3 million years. If we do some statistics on those ages, there we go. We do some statistics on those ages and their relative uncertainties. We can say that all of these different events, the intrusion of the K-spar granite, the eruption, the later intrusion, and then eventually the pluton, all occurred within 50,000 years. To humans, that sounds really long. Geologically, it's not very long at all. Things like the resurgent domes in Yellowstone come up some tens of thousands of years or longer after those large eruptions. sometimes hundreds of thousands of years later. So this is quite a short series of events. Okay. That second tuff, the tuff of 11 Mile Canyon, which I've hardly talked about yet, happens about 200,000 years later. That's what these two samples down here are. So it's 25.1 million years old instead of 25.3. Okay. So if all of this magmatic activity concluded within 50,000 years, we have this pause where we've put the cap on the soda bottle and it hasn't exploded again yet. We still don't quite know if that soda bottle had to be shaken again, as in, did it need some new magma, or was the cap just holding on really tight and there was still eruptible magma down there? So that's what I'm going to keep moving towards. All right. So I said in one of my slides with a million arrows on them that we were also going to look at compositions of these magmas. Okay. This is silica content, SiO2, versus aluminum concentration. And these are the three of the different intrusive rocks in this magmatic system. The Freeman Creek Pluton has slightly less silica and slightly more aluminum than the Case Bar granite and the granite porphyry, which overlap in compositions. Ooh. Pieces of pumice from the Poco Canyon eruption. Those are those like in the rock that went around the kind of brownish, soft-looking pieces. Those have compositions that overlap with the granite porphyry and the Case Bar granite and a little bit of the Pluton. But there are some of these pieces of the Pluton that are slightly lower in silica composition. If we measure the compositions of minerals, so crystals, things that were solid floating in the melt, those have a composition that sits over here, allowing this to conclude that parts of the Pluton are a mixture of liquids. Okay, these pumice are pieces of essentially entirely melt or almost entirely melt that erupted during the big Poco Canyon eruption. Okay. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Parts of the Pluton are a mixture of that liquid and crystals. Okay. These bulk compositions we can use to determine the pressure of crystallization of these magmas. I need this for some thermodynamic modeling, which will be in the next couple of slides. The pressures of crystallization are between 100 and 300 megapascals, which in distance equates to about 3 to 9 kilometers depth. And that's consistent with the distances that we see in the field. Okay. The last piece that I need is temperature. What temperature did these things crystallize at? This is a plot of trace element concentrations in zircon crystals. I mentioned zircon previously as being very useful for measuring the age of rocks. It is also useful for measuring what temperatures those grains crystallized at. The concentration of titanium in a zircon crystal is proportional to the temperature where it crystallized, along with other compositional things. But this y-axis is crystallization temperature versus another trace element, hafnium. So there is, what I'm showing here is that there is an enormous range in temperatures where zircon crystallized, starting up at greater than 800 degrees Celsius and going down to 600 C, which is lower than where there should be magma. So my conclusions here is that these very, very low temperature zircons are probably recording some hydrothermal activity rather than magmatic. And these high temperature ones are telling us about initial crystallization in the magma system, assuming that it cooled over time. Okay. I can also use pairs of different minerals, plagioclase, which is a feldspar, and melt compositions to calculate approximate water content. Water is the main volatile species in magmas. And what we can see is that the potassium feldspar granite, which was the first event, is rather high in water content. The eruption, the tuff of Poco Canyon, has slightly lower water content, and then over time, that water builds back up. Okay. All of those parameters, we're kind of getting towards this figure, which is crystallinity, so percent crystals versus dissolved water content. And I have these different fields which describe the styles of eruptions or whether something is eruptible. Okay, so below this 55% crystallinity, which is actually rather conservative. Some people think that is much lower, somewhere down near 40. Above this line, things are not eruptible. Below this line, things are eruptible, and they might erupt either explosively or effusively, which just means it flows rather than exploding. These fields were put forward by another paper that looked at hundreds of different eruptions and quantified or estimated where there are transitions in eruption styles based on crystallinity and volatile content. Okay, so I'm putting on here the Freeman Creek granite, that's our pluton, and the tuff of Poco Canyon. We know it erupted explosively. I can calculate the crystallinity by looking at the rock. Okay, and we calculated the water content using mineral chemistry. The Freeman Creek granite, it is now entirely crystalline. We calculated its crystallinity its thing beeping bugs me, sorry. We calculated its crystallinity based on that bulk compositional mixture between crystal compositions and liquid compositions. That was a couple of slides ago. And this water content was again calculated based on coexisting mineral compositions. These are what I've used as our starting compositions, 300 megapascals that we calculated from bulk silica content or just bulk chemistry of the rocks. This 800 degrees C came from the highest range of titanium and zircon temperatures, and this 4.5 weight% water comes from the tuff of Poco Canyon. Okay. So the next thing that I'm going to be showing here is results of thermodynamic modeling using this program called rhyolite melts. And I can show you a couple of simulations. So we're starting with the composition of the tuff of Poco Canyon. If I simply decompress the magma without changing its temperature, we get a chemical and crystallinity evolution path that runs off the map here. Okay. It has a hard time getting to a non-eruptible state. If I simply cool the system without changing its pressure, which we know didn't happen because we know that the magma came to the surface and erupted, but this is just an end member, it does eventually get to a rheologically locked state, but it doesn't reproduce the granite that we know existed in this magma system. So instead, if we do a combination of cooling and decompression, we can reproduce the composition of the Freeman Creek granite, and we get to a rheologically locked state at about 740 degrees C. Okay. There are too many crystals for the magma to move once it cools off to this point. All right. Okay, so we know that following, I can now give them names. Eruption 1 is the eruption of the tuff of Poco Canyon. Eruption 2 is the tuff of 11 Mile Canyon. And my data support the left hypothesis, where following the eruption of the tuff of Poco Canyon, which was up here, we created, within 50,000 years or less, the Freeman Creek pluton, which evolved to a rheologically locked up state before the next eruption. Okay, so what does that actually mean for the next eruption? We know that this enormous tuff of 11 Mile Canyon exists, and it erupted around 200,000 years later. Its composition, so I already put up these orange and purple and pink compositions. That was Freeman Creek Pluton and the tuff of Poco Canyon and its associated intrusions. The tuff of 11 Mile Canyon has a lower silica content that overlaps in part with crystals potentially left over from the eruption of Poco Canyon. Okay, so there is a lot of compositional variation within the 11 Mile Canyon eruption. It's possible that there was some remobilization of previous crystals left over from the Poco eruption that contributed to that range. This also requires a new batch of magma. Okay, we know that the Freeman Creek Pluton, or at least the part of it associated with the Poco Canyon eruption, solidified within 50,000 years. So it was not eruptible anymore. So to generate our new large eruption, we had to shake the soda bottle, essentially. We needed some new magma, and compositionally and rheologically, which is essentially viscosity, density things, that magma could not move. Okay, so we need a new one that can. Okay, and there is a good amount of ongoing work. My student Rachel is working on relations between the 11 Mile Canyon eruption and the Freeman Creek Pluton. Promise this is the last slide with data on it. This is some of her data that she collected last week. So that's why it's all the way at the end. The pink dots are from the Freeman Creek Pluton, but a different part of it is significantly further south. And those, these are from trace elements and zircon crystals again. Those Freeman Creek Pluton compositions overlap almost entirely with the tuff of 11 Mile Canyon, which are these green triangles, whereas the tuff of Poco Canyon has a slightly different composition. Okay, I did tell you previously that yes, the Pluton is related to Poco. Parts of it are. It depends where you collect your rocks. So the northern part of the Freeman Creek Pluton, we think, is related to these red ones, the tuff of Poco Canyon, or yes, these red ones, whereas the rest of the Pluton, which is the majority of what is exposed, is more closely related to the 11 Mile Canyon eruption. So that means that similar to after the Poco Canyon eruption, a lot of granite was created. There's a lot of magma left in that Pluton, in that magma storage region, following the eruption of the 11 Mile Canyon tuff. Okay, so this is Rachel's data. It is brand new. Those are my conclusions. I think I've kept you here long enough. So I'm happy to take questions, and people on Zoom, I will try to moderate the chat.
Okay. Right. Yeah, it's a fantastic piece of data and analysis. It's amazing. Okay, so we maybe turn the lights back on, and we'll take some questions from the room first. And okay. Okay.
The impression that your relationship between pressure, temperature, and everything else sounded like the ideal gas law.
Yeah. Oh yeah, in some ways, I mean.
Could you repeat for the Zoom
Yes,
people?
sorry.
Repeat the question. Yeah,
For Zoom people, sorry, I don't know that you actually finished your question, asking your question.
No.
Okay, cool. The question is the relationship between pressure and temperature and gas exsolution is similar to the ideal gas law. Similar is correct. These are similar, right? Ideal gas law essentially assumes that no gas atoms bump into each other, which in highly pressurized, very hot gases, you kind of lose ideality. But yes, it's the same directional relationship. That yeah, higher pressure, more gas can stay dissolved in something. Yeah.
Another question? Okay.
So if you were able to put a core, which I know you can't do, right down the middle of a caldera,
Mhm.
could you figure out the perfect mix for eruptibility
Hmm.
in terms of temperature, bubbles,
Mhm.
water, and so forth, so that you could begin to predict.
So people have tried to do this.
Okay.
Repeat the question.
Yes, sorry, thanks for reminding me. The question is, if you were to put a core down into a caldera, could you predict the correct parameters for eruptibility in terms of temperature, crystallinity, composition, etc.? People have tried to do this in Hawaii. They did drill into a lava lake, which is not quite the same as a caldera, but they drilled into lava. Essentially, it's very complicated. For magma to, when we say eruptibility, that means it could erupt if it has a way to get to the surface. It could move if it found a crack or made a crack. So just because we find or are able to drill into magma below the surface doesn't necessarily mean it's not eruptible just because
So
it
there's
didn't
no
erupt. Mhm.
Or
Yeah.
fixed amount of gas that would create
Right.
that eruption.
Right. There's a range where eruption is possible, but there's not just like a hard line. There's also Hawaiian volcanoes are very different compositionally and like viscosity wise compared to Yellowstone and these ones out in Nevada. So the comparison is difficult. But yeah, I wish there were a hard line where we could just say, yep, that one's going to go off or that one's not. But there are a lot of complications. Yeah.
Like your field site, you showed so many different.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, good point. I'll go back to that map. Actually, there's a good figure, this one. Okay, they're not all perfectly tilted like this. I picked the ones where there is pluton exposed and it is still connected to the volcanic section. A lot of them are tilted, but there's only volcanics exposed, or pluton is exposed in a different mountain range and it's harder to make the direct connections between like, yes, this dike from the pluton is going directly into the tuff.
I don't think there's a chat question. I looked briefly and I didn't see one.
I think so. Okay.
Okay.
I'm on 2 screens right now. Oh, there are chat questions.
Oh, yeah, there are. Okay.
I see you. Where are you? There you are. I have to get my cursor back over to my laptop. Cool. Hi, Mike. There are 2 recently retired professors from the university on the Zoom. Hi, Bobby and Mike. I stole your office, Bobby. Okay. Question from Nan says, in your fieldwork, was there any ash flow tuff from Poco Canyon or 11 Mile? If it did exist, has it been eroded? There is ash fall, but it's in different mountain ranges. It's actually, I have the slide up for it. Oh my gosh. Okay, so I was trying to work on where we could see the direct connection here between the pluton and the volcanics. The ash fall is preserved. Ooh, it's called New Pass. It's all the way over this one. So it's a couple mountain ranges over. Like these were really large eruptions. They had big old ash clouds that caused pumice fall and ash fall. Kind of similar to why I didn't want to look at locations where the pluton is in a separate mountain range from the tuffs. It's harder to make those direct connections of who has intruded whom, or who erupted from what, when the parts of the tuff are disconnected from the intrusive units.
Was there another
think that
question
was all.
also from the,
That was all on there.
okay. Any other questions from the audience? Yeah.
Is there a tectonic explanation for all those caldera eruptions?
There are hypotheses.
Question,
Oh, that.
please.
The question is there a tectonic reason for all of these tens of caldera eruptions in Nevada in a relatively short time frame. There are hypotheses. I don't know that people necessarily agree on them, and it was kind of the outside of the scope of this particular project. I believe the most accepted, the two most accepted hypotheses is that there was some beginning of extension throughout here, and if you're thinning the crust, it makes it easier to melt the upper mantle, which can create a bunch of eruptions. Typically, those are basaltic eruptions, but they don't have to be. Like Valles Caldera is part of the Rio Grande Rift, which is an extensional thing. Could be analogous in any case. The second potential explanation is that there was a piece of an older tectonic plate up underneath this part of North America. It's the Farallon plate. And that it started to peel off of North America, which allows more hot mantle from below to upwell into that space, again, allowing for melting. Yeah, so not entirely agreed upon. I don't have particular opinions either way. I just know that they are there. Yeah.
Why did you choose a Coca-Cola bottle instead of a beer?
The question is, why did I choose a Coke bottle instead of a beer bottle? One, I've given a simplified version of this to kids before. And two, I don't drink.
Okay. Very good. All right. On that note, is there any more questions?
Can end on a
Deep thought.
one.
Okay. Okay, well, let's just give us, Maddie, a thank you for a very excellent and very interesting talk.